And we're online. Welcome everyone to week 6, and this week we're going to be looking at learning management systems and learning analytics, two areas that have become quite popular in educational environments over the recent years. So let's get started with learning management systems. What are people's experience with learning management systems? Now I know you've used at least one, because Learning at Griffith is a learning management system. So what's been your experience of learning at Griffith? Anything good? Anything bad?
Can I say something?
You may.
For me, it was a completely new experience, and as I mentioned before, I was completely unfamiliar with technology, with new technologies. So the last assignment, that was my first last semester, that was my first semester. I was completely confusing, and I didn't know what I have to do. I didn't know how to use the system. I didn't know how to reach course content and other stuff. So this about 6 months, I had a huge jump in using technology, and now I feel like an expert in technology.
Well, good to hear. It does take a while to learn a new system, and learning management systems are not simple. They're quite complex by their very nature, because they're designed to actually manage and control the learning process. But how have people found uses for learning management systems? How have they helped you with your studies? Or have they not? Yes, Patricia.
So can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, cool. I found it very helpful in the States. When I was there for a little while, what was really good is that when we were put into groups, we all know how much people love being in a stupid group. But we made our own, like we hung out, we stuck our stuff in Google Docs so that we could all work on it. Like we made our own connections really outside of ASU. The learning place with EQ is fairly awful, I think. I don't like, when I've been on there, I find it can be really a pain in the butt. But yeah, I think Blackboard's it's pretty basic, and everybody seems to use it. Yeah.
That's a very good, it's a very important point, Patricia. One we'll get to in a little bit. That learning environments are now moving beyond learning management systems into what are called personal learning environments, where you combine a whole selection of tools, social media and Facebook and a whole lot of other aspects to create your own learning environment rather than just one that was created by a particular company.
Yep.
Okay, well let me share the document and we'll run through that and then we'll return to you guys for some questions. Is that sharing? Yep, looks like it is. Okay, so as a whole, learning management systems are primarily used to centralize and automate course administrations and student administrations. So they're really not learning management systems in the main. They're more organizational management systems and student management systems rather than actually managing the learning process. Some do make some attempt at that, but by far the main use of learning management systems are to manage enrollments and more about restricting access to materials rather than providing access to materials. If we were simply after providing access to materials, websites and other tools are more open and usable in that respect. that many uses of learning management systems are around slowly providing access to resources, or for set courses where students have to pay for access, preventing access for those that haven't paid, which is what a lot of university learning management systems are used for. So it's a little bit of a misnomer referring to them as learning management, but they do have some ability to support learning. Any comments on that? Okay, so moving on to what Patricia was saying before around the idea of personal learning environments. Because of the limitations on learning management systems, a lot of people have started using their own tools to supplement or to as alternatives to institutional learning management systems, which might be shared documents such as Google Docs, or it might be their own websites or wikis that they've set up, or other forums for communicating and sharing resources and working collaboratively on tasks. And indeed, what we're doing in this course is modeling some of those tools, such as Google Hangouts, which is not fully integrated into Griffith University just yet, although they're in the process of doing so, and also the WordPress website, which has certain advantages over the Griffith University Blackboard environment for presenting information and for tracking your progress through courses and giving you feedback on those courses. So they're all really just software tools that provide different advantages and disadvantages. But one of the problems with learning management systems are that they tend to constrain you, or try to constrain you, to one particular system. And that's certainly being challenged at the moment. One of the new entrants into this sort of sphere has been what are called MOOCs. Has anyone done a MOOC? Or what they're called is massive online open courses. Okay, so Patricia has. I can't see Stephanie, but...
Yep.
So what has been your experience with MOOCs?
Well, not a lot of people finish them. That's my understanding. I think in the States they're a very good idea because tertiary education is so expensive there. I think a lot of people, if they already have some skills, they can use them as a way to upgrade, but without a great deal of cost. But I just think that it didn't suit me. I still prefer a more personalised thing, I guess.
Yes, that's certainly been one of the bigger challenges of MOOCs. And there's really quite different types of MOOCs. The original MOOCs were very collaborative and were designed around a learning community, and they tended to emerge from that community and sharing of resources. And they tend to then blossom and grow as a result of that. Then they went through a process of more commercialized MOOCs by the major institutions such as MIT and so forth. And they tended to be more about sharing as advertisements of the best practice at those universities. And so you could go and study a course at Harvard or at MIT or Stanford, and it was much more about the branding of the institution than necessarily about the quality of the learning process that was occurring. Now, it's not to say that they didn't put an awful lot of effort and work into those courses, and they're very high quality. And sometimes they would have 200 or 300 people actually working on them as tutors and managing it. Of course, they could have tens of thousands of students. But that was a very different intent for the MOOC than what it was originally envisaged as. And yes, you're correct that in the United States in particular, where course fees are now so high, a lot of people are looking for alternatives to self-study, and MOOCs are proving useful in that respect. But the other big advantage of MOOCs has been in the third world, where they don't have access to high-quality instruction, even at a face-to-face level. Certainly not the equivalent of the Ivy League universities and the major universities in the West. So having access to learning at a very high level has been a boom for countries in Africa and parts of Asia, where they now have access to that level of instruction. And indeed, some of the universities are incorporating those MOOCs into their own courses to support their academics in presenting their studies, particularly across all areas, but in particular areas of science and engineering and mathematics and the quite complex learning areas. So MOOCs are quite involved, and there's really two sorts: the connectivist MOOCs and what are called the X-MOOCs or instructivist MOOCs. The connectivist MOOCs are all about forming connections with others and sharing ideas and working collaboratively on problems, while the instructivist MOOCs tend to be much more like traditional online courses, but without the personal interaction. They're more like distance education or self-paced courses. Does anyone else have any experience with MOOCs or anything they'd like to say about that? Remembering you may be muted. Or you may just have nothing to say. Okay. So there are a range of learning management systems, though. Blackboard is certainly one of the most popular today, mostly because it bought out all of its competitors and combined them into itself. But it's certainly the predominant learning management system, and it's been around for a long, long time. And it really does work on an instructivist or direct instruction pedagogical model. It was designed originally for training of staff in organizations, and very much used that sort of TAFE-based training model for construction of learning activities. Now, it doesn't mean you can't do other learning activities in that environment, but it is designed to facilitate more direct instruction type activities. But there are others. Moodle was originally designed to Blackboard using what was called a social constructivist pedagogical model. But for better or worse, it became very popular because it was free, and over time it became more and more like Blackboard. And Moodle and Blackboard in terms of how learning occurs in the environment. Sakai is one that's trying to do things quite differently, and they've got two sorts of learning management system. One which is built around projects and collaboration, and the other one around personal control and remixing material, where students are presented with information and they change it and remix it and represent it back. So again, quite different pedagogical models, more traditional learning management systems, but it's being used in a number of universities. Edmodo is another one that's quite popular at the moment, and it's claiming a connectivist pedagogical model, a bit like the CMOOCs, where it's much more about interaction between participants than about knowledge presentation. And then we have Canvas, which is another one, and this uses what they call an integrated learning outcomes-based model. But essentially, it's fairly similar to many of the others, but it does provide a higher degree of tracking of learning progress, where they're modeled on rubrics and you can see your progress through courses in a lot more detail than you can with other learning management systems. And over time, there's been other ones introduced. Fairly recently, there's been one developed by Apple called iTunes U that incorporates some elements. Google has released Google Classrooms, and they also have another learning management system, which is sort of more of a back-end tool for creating your own learning management systems. But there's been a number of other players in this field because it is seen as quite a lucrative field for companies to get involved in. But it really all comes back down to how educators use these environments for teaching. And some environments provide advantages for certain types of teaching and approaches, and others disadvantages. So what have been your experiences with learning management systems after all that? This is where we have the interactive element of the tutorial. So who's used a different type of learning management system?
Hello, you there?
Hi, Beth.
Hi. Well, I use iTunes U every day in my classroom, and we've set it up so that Year 5 and Year 6 they have a course for each of their 4 core subjects. They also have one for like homework. Have another one for like that has a whole lot of video tutorials on how to use different apps, and we've also set it up that like we have boarders at our school, so for prospective boarders, prior to their entry to the school, they get access to certain courses so that they can have a look at the work the students are doing before they even arrive at the school. So it sort of reaches out not only into the classroom but beyond.
And Beth, I believe you also run Blackboard. What do you find as the advantages and disadvantages of the two environments?
I've used Blackboard a little bit earlier in the piece before I sort of discovered iTunes U. The thing I like, Blackboard, well, they're very similar. I just find that with a particular course, you can personalise it a little bit more to your year level or to a particular task, and it's sort of set up in like I call them chapters, so to speak, and then you can put interactive tasks. It sort of allows me to put instruction in there, put video tutorials in there, and then allows me to sort of put in apps if they need to use apps, and then it gives them a task that they need to work on, like a creative task to go on with. So I just find it's a little bit more, it's an easier thing for the kids to use and access.
No, thanks, Beth. Has anyone else had an experience with other learning management systems?
Nope.
Stephanie, have you used a learning management system?
Other than Blackboard, no.
Okay.
I was going in a previous assignment to create a Moodle, but it was just too long-winded and complex for the
Yes.
assessment time that I had, and I gave it away and did something else instead. But yeah, I haven't really had any other experience.
No, that's fine. Okay, well, let's move on then, and we'll look at learning analytics. This has really come about as a result of the advantages of learning management systems to allow us to collect lots of data on students and to track their progress through the use of that data. So, where are we? So the whole idea of learning analytics is that we now have access to information about what students are doing. So for example, I can go in and look at when you last accessed learning at Griffith and when you did various activities and what you've been doing. But more advanced systems can actually track how you read documents, even down to which words you're looking at a particular time. And we've got to a point where we can collect a huge amount of data on students as they're engaging in use of online tools in particular, because we've got that two-way connection with the device that they're using. Some of the research I go into with using vision tracking and brainwave analysis goes a step further, where we actually study where students are looking at a page and also what their brain activity is like while they're engaged with those activities, and how that can be used to inform teachers as to how to improve the learning process. But that's a bit more extreme. Most learning analytics is based around a range of different things. Social network analysis looks at how people interact with each other in an online environment, how groups form, how information is shared between those groups or between instructors and groups, access to online resources and those elements. Social ecological modeling is used to identify the behavior of participants in a learning environment, and so other things such as behavioral trust, which is around getting people engaged with talking online, and then around influence and passivity, trying to get people engaged with discussions and processes that they have with an online environment. Now, one of the big aspects of learning analytics is educational data mining, where we try to take all the data that's available and draw upon that to find out interesting things about the learner. So from your experience with learning management systems, what sort of data have you seen or do you think is being collected on you? Anyone got any ideas on what sort of data might be being collected on you? Or have you used any data from a learning management system for your own students, if you've been involved in management of a learning management system? Yes, Patricia. Now, you don't need to hold your hand up. I'm just trying to help
Okay.
Tobias into the system.
Oh, okay. So, well, I'm not sure, but we now have data dashboards.
Yes, data dashboards.
Yeah. So I've made my own in the SEP for the 10, 11s, and 12s. I don't want it. And so it's been interesting, especially given that the NAPLAN results often have very little resemblance to what the kids are doing in grade 12, which is interesting, and it's always an improvement. So even if they've really bombed on NAPLAN, they're happily moving towards a QCE. Yeah, so I guess the data dashboards, it seems to be the new thing in EQ, so, you know.
No, absolutely. The new data dashboards are a response to trying to provide alternative information to national testing and other more abstracted sets of data to try to give teachers more valuable information on which to make decisions.
Tracking students is always valuable. Like, we've got new software. I still don't know if I'm allowed to use it, but prior to my having meetings with families especially, I will cut and paste, you know, the report cards for the last 2 or 3 semesters, and that always gives a valuable thing. So the school's now got new software that will enable a whole bunch of stuff for us just to go in and click on it, which will be just more convenient, that's all.
Yes, it certainly can be. Sometimes we do get to a point where we have data overload, where there's too much data available. But certainly the new technological tools are designed to try to make that data friendly and accessible. Now, does anyone else have any experience with using data about students or their understanding of how data about them might be being used by their teachers or academics?
I find some of them a little silly, not silly, but just obvious, because like, they like the predictive element, so they can identify at-risk learners through data. Usually those are the kids who are swearing at you and not handing in assignments. They're not usually that hard to pick. Do you know what I mean?
That's true, but with very large data sets, it is sometimes possible to make quite accurate predictions. Indeed, at university level, we analyse all of our first-year students and use quite complex predictive models to identify those that are most likely to fail in their first semester, and we then provide them with additional support based upon that analytical data selection processes. So when you do have large sets of data, it is possible to make some predictions. Of course, it won't always be accurate, but over large statistically valid numbers, it can be a useful measure to apply.
I think that's, Jason, that's one of my problems with it, is that it doesn't, for me, it doesn't take into account the human element, if you like.
No,
So,
and it can't. By its very
yeah,
nature, statistical work on large numbers and large averages.
yeah.
So there'll always be variances with individuals. So there's no way around that. And there is the potential in the far future for complex systems enough to be able to analyse each individual, but we're a long way from that at this stage. We don't have enough data and information about each individual student to make those analyses. We can make it on large groups by averaging and looking at trends, but we don't have enough information for each individual. That's where a classroom teacher can bring their expertise into the environment and make those analyses from the data they've got available through interactions. So welcome, Toby. We're discussing learning analytics and learning management systems tonight.
I'm getting in at last. I've been struggling all this time, so.
Good to see you joining us.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Okay, so on the screen, another aspect of learning analytics is open data. Many institutions collect a lot of private data, particularly about students, which we wouldn't want to share with the public. But there are lots of information that we can collect openly and share. And many governments are trying to share that information. The federal government, the Queensland and city councils are all sharing as much information as they can. And one that you'd probably be familiar with is My School, which aggregates a whole lot of data about schools and presents information to the public about the success or otherwise of those schools against various measures. And of course that has some difficulties. Of course, again, it's on large statistical values, but it was seen as a want from the public, and the government provided that as a way of addressing perceived public concerns about education. Of course, it did have a whole lot of other impacts that weren't necessarily thought through as closely as they might have been around the prestige or otherwise of various schools, but it was what it was, and is what it is. And indeed, there's now a university equivalent as well for university courses. But there's lots of other big data sets from the Australian Bureau of Statistics, which you probably would have been well aware of with the census happening a little while ago. And of course, other companies produce a lot of data as well, such as Google and Facebook, all of which have various implications and issues. Now, NAPLAN has probably been the biggest educational data collection exercise conducted in the last few years, or quite a few years now. And it was originally intended to provide information to assist teachers in making decisions on how to assist students in their learning. Now, unfortunately, it had a whole range of other possible uses that were attempted to be applied to it, but in its pure form, it was only ever designed to be an assessment of how students were going against particular benchmarks and to provide that advice to teachers. How it was otherwise used is not really a fair criticism of NAPLAN, because it was never really intended to be used as a way of ranking schools against one another or students against one another and a whole range of other purposes that it was then used, not the least as being ranking teachers against one another. But I do show you here a little data analysis tool that was developed by Griffin, and it's just a simple way of using NAPLAN data to identify which students need particular assistance in particular areas. So if you're used to working with NAPLAN data, you'll know that you get a whole series of questions and how students went on those various questions. Now, if you sort those as described, you can then draw a diagonal line, and by then looking and counting up the number of successes, you can work out which students need which assistance with which questions. a fairly simple data analysis tool, but one that is not always necessarily highlighted in the NAPLAN data. Most states and territories do have a tool available to analyze NAPLAN data, but it's not necessarily particularly user-friendly, although from what I've seen, they're getting better each year at trying to make it so. So what have been people's experience with NAPLAN, if anyone's had such experience? So for those not familiar with NAPLAN, it's the National Assessment of Literacy and Numeracy. And it's given to all of our students in years, I think it's 3, 5, and 7 or something like that.
3, 5, 7, and 9.
Well, in special ed, we've had a different relationship with it. So prior to this principle, our students were not allowed to do NAPLAN. I use that, you know. They were not expected to do it. They were not encouraged to do it. Special ed was definitely seen, which is stupid because I've been told that our statistics don't influence the school stats in any way, but some of the admin team felt that they were better not doing it. They'd just rather not have the kids in there doing NAPLAN, which is really stupid because, like I said, we've got kids going on to do master's degrees at uni and whatever. But since our new principle, now our kids are expected to do it, so it's become the norm. So that's been an interesting change of attitude. But he's leaving, so we'll just wait and see what the new principal says.
Yes, there's been a lot of misuses of NAPLAN and misapplications of it around school prestige, which has driven a lot of focus on NAPLAN preparation and attempted distortions of results. But that's much more around improper use of the NAPLAN than the actual test itself. If the tests were being used as they were intended, none of those things should be occurring. But unfortunately, that's not the political and mostly political environment that we're faced with. Does anyone else have any experiences with NAPLAN? Or from your own countries, have you got experiences from other national testing programs or large tests of collection of student data?
Yes, can I say something?
Yes, you may.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
In my country, we had some high stakes tests like this, and I believe that this kind of testing have some negative impacts that NAPLAN has now in Australia. I think this kind of testing brings teaching for testing as a natural outcome. And you know, this necessary outcome of this kind of testing when it is such important to have some kind of testing like this. So naturally, the quality of classes will be lessened because all the teachers and the students only think about those tests and they cannot focus on real learnings, and it would be only teaching and learning only for tests.
Yes, that certainly has been the concern with an overemphasis on testing over the educational process. So let's look at some uses of educational data. One sort of data that we collect about students is demographic data. Their ages, ethnicities, gender, native languages, and other aspects. But we also collect a lot of data about their learning through testing and other measures that we use. But then we have their school progress, how they've progressed from year to year. But also sometimes we record their classroom management encounters, their relationship with other students, and other aspects that go into learning management databases, which are becoming quite common in many schools. And the final bit of data that we often collect, which isn't always recorded in databases, is around their perceptions, their values and beliefs, and their view of teachers, their view of teacher satisfaction. And these often come about in like the websites such as Rate My Teacher, where students get to express their opinions on schools and on teachers in a fairly public way. But it can also occur through social media and other tools as well. So there's various ways we can use data in schools. It can be used to help uncover problems, convince people for the need of change, confirm or discredit assumptions about students and school practices, work out the root cause of problems and pinpoint areas where change is most needed, prevent an over-reliance upon standardized tests, help evaluate the effectiveness of programs, provide feedback to teachers and administrators, help support differentiation and moving away from one-size-fits-all approaches, responding to questions about accountability. And so when schools are called to account on issues, they've got data to support their decision-making, and to build a culture of inquiry and continuous improvement. So that's a whole range of things that you could be starting to think about as you come to your second assignment around your school improvement or your institutional improvement strategy and plan. How might you be able to incorporate the use of data collection and data management, which might flow through the use of other technologies, such as a learning management system or other aspects, that you could then use to either support your changes or to make those changes more effective. And this here is a model that's been used in Education Queensland schools for a little while now. It's using a double cycle to inform teaching and learning through the use of student data, where goals and targets are set. Then information is collected, interrogated, inferred, and verified. And I'll leave you to read through that as you wish. But it then has a second process of implementing, accessing, and reflecting and planning. Now, one other aspect of data is actually making it useful to people to be able to interpret and engage with. And visualizations are one way of doing that. We talked a bit before about dashboards, but there are other ranges of visualizations that are available. Infographics are a very common one, where we visualize information, complex information, through some sort of graphic. We have data visualization tools such as Gapminder, which is a bit like a dynamic PowerPoint. And then there's another one called Many Eyes, which is another tool for analyzing and visualizing large amounts of data. You can create your own visualizations with your students or for yourself using various tools. Wolfram Alpha provides a tool for analyzing Facebook data. You can create timelines with students so they can analyze their progress through learning activities. There's a whole range of mapping visualizations for geo-visualization of data. Word clouds are very popular, where you highlight the frequency of words in a particular conversation or document. Infographics are very popular. And then the last one is what we call data-driven visualizations, which very much link into what we call the dashboards, where things change dynamically based upon new data as it's coming in live. Now, learning management systems can be used for data analysis. There's one that will analyze all the conversations in a Blackboard conversation, for example, and provide a visual map of how students have communicated with each other and the frequency of that communication. And that can be useful to identify those students that aren't engaging or having conversations just with a few students and not others. And then there's also computer games that can be used to collect data as well. course, they're also a digital tool that are collecting lots of information about the player. And one that I use a lot with my own students is SimSchool, which simulates a classroom and provides a whole lot of data about the students in that class to inform pre-service teachers about how to better go about their teaching process. Okay, so that's been a range of different tools being used for data visualization and learning management. But the key thing you need to be thinking about now is how you can incorporate these various tools and approaches into the plans you make for your institutional plan. So who's got some ideas or questions around that? So can anyone think of any way of using any of these ideas into their own institutional planning?
Jason, if
Yes.
I am Tobias coming in for the first time, I've been struggling, and eventually I'm there. But I'd like to refer to back to my country about a test that we conduct. Particularly, we call it as DAT. Particularly for diagnostic tests to find out the strength of the individual student when it comes to them making the subject package decisions, particularly for career pathways and so on. So in my second assignment, if this is possible, we can include that apart from students who are in the terminal years that we conduct national examinations and another exams that we conduct.
Yes, no, certainly you can, particularly if you're going to use it as part of a change process in your institution and you feel that that is a useful process to incorporate into your institutional plan to engage more with data that's available and incorporate that into supporting the changes you'd like to see in your organization. So from what I interpret there, the first test you were mentioning is more of a diagnostic tool to identify where students would be most likely to succeed around different career paths. So helping them to choose university courses or other sorts of courses that they might pursue or careers they might pursue.
Oh, correct.
Yes. No, and certainly you can incorporate that in. Now, learning analytics and learning management systems are just one of the technologies that we've got access to include in your learning, to include in your institutional plans. Last week we looked at gaming and virtual environments, and we've looked at a whole range of other ICTs. So it's just one of the technologies that you can include for consideration. But has anyone else got any examples, or Tobias, or sorry, Toby, do you have any other ideas?
No, this is the one that I just wanted to express. Perhaps I have some other stuff to mention, but towards the end of the session I will say so. I did just send an email as well regarding all other stuff.
Okay.
Thank you.
How about the others? Okay then. Well, next week we're going to be looking at one more technology, which is around mobile technologies, which is also having a fairly significant impact upon how many educational institutions are engaging with educational technology. So we'll be discussing a whole range of issues around mobile technologies when we come together again next week. But do we have any other questions about your assignment or any other aspects of what we discussed this week or in previous weeks that you'd like to go through now?
Okay, particularly for me, I've just joined and I still got a lot of questions here. I chose my system more or less as a school, and then there are other parties involved: the government, the teachers, the school board, and several others also involved. So I've just put that out for just having doubt on this one, whether they're appropriate parties to be involved in this model. But the focus is the school itself. And then that's one. Two, I have not got the proper response, or the response from the experts on my Delphi study has not been that good, so I'm still struggling on this. These are the two areas that I am struggling with. Thank you.
Okay, so in terms of your scope, in terms of your systems analysis, including aspects of wider systems is always a good thing, because it gives you different perspectives on things that could impact upon your school and your classrooms. So that's fine to incorporate into consideration around issues related to the use of educational technology in your school. In terms of getting Delphi participants and responses, that is always a challenge. But don't restrict yourself just to perceived experts. Most people feel as though they've got some expertise in education, even if they don't really. So you can always source advice from a range of other people, as long as you think that you'll be able to get some new ideas or opinions from those. And sometimes people from outside of direct education can provide a different perspective. Say they have some problem with technology. They might be able to give you some different ideas, those just involved with the educational process.
Okay, great. I do get some ideas from there. Actually, in the system model, I had two issues. One is the inaccessibility problem, particularly with internet coverage. And the other one is to do with high cost of accessing internet. So these two issues would be looked at.
Yes, and I can imagine they would be major issues around organizations in particular countries. But see what you can do with your research and through your systems analysis models to try to come up with solutions to those issues. It may be partnering with companies or other organizations, or linking in with other groups that do have facilities that might be able to share or collaborate with those resources.
Thank you. Appreciate it with all this response.
Does anyone else have any questions? Okay, then we might start wrapping it up. Remembering that your first assignment is coming due fairly soon now, so you need to get your Delphi studies underway. If you do have difficulties with the tool, remember it's just a tool, and you can use other alternative tools such as email to collect your information. But you do want to try to develop a consensus from your experts so that they can provide you advice in framing your two scenarios, and that will then round out your first assignment, and then provide good material upon which to base your second assignment. So, any final questions or comments? Okay then, we'll wrap it up, and I'll see you all next week.
Bye.
Good night all.
Bye-bye.